Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Well, as you know, I'm sure that most of you know the reason why we had to cancel the Zoom meeting last time. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Hear you, Professor.
All right. The reason, of course, is simply because of the fires that raged over Orange County, particularly the Irvine area. And since I live around Irvine, we really had to evacuate, and that really resulted in a logistic nightmare for me. For the simple reason because it's very difficult to find a place to stay. Um, all hotels were pretty much booked, and it was well, we can't complain after all because I know that many people probably did not have any shelter, so I can't be complaining. But nevertheless, it was hectic, and for that reason, I decided to cancel the Zoom meeting. But to tell you the truth, it's a miracle really that the firefighters were able to contain that fire, because when it first started and when I looked at it, I said, well, this is going to take a long time because of the intensity of the fire. And luckily, the firefighters did an excellent job of containing it in a very short period of time. And also, it's a miracle that a lot of the neighborhoods, the houses, etc., went unscathed. And in fact, I thought that there would be a lot of houses that would not make it, will burn down. But fortunately for everyone, really, that did not happen. If there was anything, probably very few houses were burned, and unfortunately, but it could have been a lot worse, have it not been for the um, heroic work of the firefighters that we pretty much, usually take them for granted, but they really need, um, we must give them a lot of credit, in other words, and we owe them a lot of gratitude for obviously saving lives and saving property, and they're simply putting their lives on the line every day in their duty to keep us safe. And we all pretty much appreciate that, and wish them all the best. Okay, so having said that, any questions before we start? Does anyone have any questions?
Is there homework due this Saturday?
Well, actually, I'm gonna give you an extension on that.
Thank you.
So you really don't have to. It's due on Saturday, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, 31st.
I'm gonna give you 10 days after Saturday. Okay, to actually submit your homework. 10 days after Saturday, so I don't know when that would be. But again, as I said, if you are a couple of days late than that, then that's okay. You know, I do understand that a lot of you are probably going through, you know, a lot of hardship right now, especially those who have lived in areas that were impacted by the fire. So, you know, I'm willing to do that for you, and you don't have to worry about the homework for now. As long as you submit it, you're okay. Even if you're late, that's fine. You will not be penalized for that.
Can you post the exam answers?
Oh, I guess, you know, you could get the, oh, I see. Yeah, I could do that. I guess you were not present during the session that we had going over the midterm exam.
I was here, but the Zoom link doesn't work. I tried to go over it on my own because you hadn't graded my paper yet. It came in after you did that Zoom meeting. And so I went back to double check the Zoom meeting and the link does not work.
Okay. Yeah, I'll do that for you. That's no problem. I will post the answer key for you on Titanium, hopefully today or maybe tomorrow at the latest.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, there is a couple of questions that are being asked now for the past 3 or 4 days, and I've been getting exactly the same questions from a few students regarding the homework assignments and also regarding the paper that you know, you need to submit at the end of the semester, not the writing paper, but the I don't know, what did I call it? Does anyone remember how we called it on Titanium? What's the name we gave to it?
It was just like
What's that?
class report.
Yeah, class report, exactly. That's what it is. Okay, so the class report again, you're supposed to submit that by the end of the semester. And it's all one-page report. In other words, I want you to use your own words telling me exactly what you have learned from this class, what your expectations were and where your expectations met, etc. So in just one page, double space. It's not going to be that hard. You know, just give me a summary of what you think you learned in this class. And that's, you know, guaranteed 5% to your final grade, because that's the how much that paper is worth. It's worth 5% of your total grade. So that's important, and everyone is going to get that if you submit the paper, because there is no right or wrong answer there. So again, I encourage all of you to write that one-page summary and submit it by the end of the semester through Titanium. Again, please, through Titanium, not emails. Like, you know, I had some one student or two submitting their midterm exam via email. They can't do that. You know, that's why we have the Titanium, and that's why I have put the midterm exam on Titanium for you to actually use that as your forum to submit exams, homeworks, writing assignments, etc. So please, please do not email me anything because I'm simply not going to look at it. That's one thing. And another thing, you know, I had one student or two that were late on the submission of their midterm exams. Well, you need to tell me why you were late. You know, otherwise, you know, I'm going to penalize you. And I have penalized students who were actually late. So unless you give me the reason why, and unless you give me proof if you were sick or you went to hospital or whatever the case may be, but, you know, you got to present me with some proof. Otherwise, you know, if you have no explanation and if you don't let me know, then obviously I'm going to penalize you for taking or submitting the exam late. So it's very important that, if a circumstance arise where you have to not take the final exam on its allotted date for some reason that is acceptable to me, of course, well, you need to let me know beforehand, and you need to send me all the necessary documentation. Otherwise, you will end up with a 0 regardless. So it's very, very important that you keep that in mind. Okay, and those of you, of course, who need extra time, to take the final exam because of special needs, please let me know. Let me know that you are on that list, so I can obviously give you more time to take the final exam. It's very important also. So please make sure that you adhere to all these rules and regulations that you have, and take advantage of anything that you have. Like, for example, more time on the exams because you have special needs or whatever. So let me know all these things. It's important that you communicate with me directly, and to leave anything to chance. Okay, today we will continue with chapter 7, which again deals with trade policies for developing nations. And I'm going to summarize very quickly on what we have done so far with developing nations. Remember what we said, that basically many developing countries have not yet integrated their economy basically into the global industrial economy. A lot of them, as a result, have been marginalized, and those that were able to integrate their economy into the global industrial economic network were able to reap a lot of benefits, like China, for example, or Southeast Asian countries. All of those were able to reap huge benefits simply because they were very successful in integrating their economies with the rest of the world. Now, obviously, the less developed countries have been pretty much handicapped by poor infrastructure, inadequate education, rampant corruption, high trade barriers, as well as exorbitant transportation costs. So all of these things are impediments or obstacles to less developed countries doing well. Now, a lot of these countries have, on many occasions, demanded that rich, industrialized countries must open up their markets for their goods. And they said that this is the only way or the only chance that they have to actually increase income for their citizens and reduce poverty. Now, that may be true in one sense, but I believe that less developed countries basically must do these things on their own. In other words, they must roll up their sleeves and go to work. I mean, they have a lot to accomplish within their countries before they can think about the benefits from trade. So there are a lot of things that they need to do in order to be able to get the most benefit out of trade. Because if they're going to trade and keep everything else as usual within their countries in terms of not taking care of corruption, not taking care of illiteracy, not taking care of their infrastructure, not instituting the structural reforms that are required. If they don't pay attention to those things, then trade is really not going to help them out. In other words, what I'm trying to say here is trade by itself is really not going to alleviate the economic problems and challenges that these countries face. Trade will help tremendously, yes, but trade needs to have the foundations in place before trade can actually be regarded as a double whammy, if you will. So it's very important for countries to actually take these things very seriously, roll up their sleeves, and go to work, like what China has done and like what some countries in Southeast Asia have done. They have obviously done the right thing. They have done what was required of them to do. And then they used trade as a takeoff point, if you will, for them to actually prosper economically. So again, less developed countries must be able to do all of that. That's the only way that they can be able to actually solve their problems. Some of the challenges that the less developed countries face are unstable export markets. Now, why do they face unstable export markets? Very simply, because these countries are basically producing only agricultural and primary products, because that's where they have a competitive advantage in. And they happen to be exporting these goods to other countries. Now, the problem with these primary products and agricultural products is that they have a very inelastic demand and supply. Highly inelastic. Both demand and supply are highly inelastic. In other words, they have very low price elasticities of both demand and supply. So any change in demand or any change in supply will lead to huge price fluctuations. And this is a huge problem for less developed countries. Now, this obviously will lead to drastic decline in income for these countries, simply because prices would fall tremendously as a result of any demand or supply shock, simply because they are highly inelastic. So when prices fall, revenues would fall, income would fall for these countries. And also, when these prices fall drastically relative to the price of imports, because remember, less developed countries are importing manufactured goods, and they are exporting agricultural goods or primary products. Now, the price of manufactured goods are highly stable. Why? Because the demand and supply for manufactured goods are relatively elastic. Not inelastic, but elastic, which means there is more price stability, which means that these markets are more stable. And this would also mean that the terms of trade will always deteriorate for the less developed countries. In other words, the terms of trade will never go in their favor, simply because the price of imports are falling relative to the price of exports. And just to give you an example here, look at the market for coffee. Coffee obviously is an agricultural product. And you can see that the demand and supply are highly inelastic. In other words, they're very steep, as you can see. So if we start from initial demand and supply, D0, S0, you see that the price will be determined at $4.50 per pound for coffee. And the quantities that will be bought and sold will be 5 million pounds. Now let's say that there is a demand shock in the market for coffee, so that there is a decrease in demand. And this could happen simply because of a fall in income. It could happen because of change in tastes. It could happen because of the price of substitute goods have fallen. So there are many reasons why the demand may actually decrease for coffee. If that is the case, look at what's going to happen to the price of coffee. The price of coffee would fall from $4.50 to $2. Which is about 100% decrease in price. That's a drastic decline in price, 100%. But as you can see there, the quantity really doesn't change by much. But look at the price. The impact on price is huge. And the reason for that is simply because both the demand and supply are inelastic. Same thing if there is a supply shock. Let's say, for example, there is an increase in supply simply because farmers happen to have a bumper crop. And this would lead to a drastic decrease in price, over 100% fall in price. So you can see that countries, less developed countries who happen to be specializing in producing and exporting agricultural products do face this huge price volatility. Okay, that's basically all that I want to say about the terms of trade and the instability of export markets. In other words, this is a huge challenge that less developed countries happen to face. And, you know, we're really not going to focus on all of that. That's basically all that I want to say. Now we come to cartels. What are cartels? Well, cartels are simply a term that we use when we see a group of firms, or countries for that matter, happen to band together in order to collude on either prices or quantities in order to make economic profits. So collusion, or the formation of collusions by these different countries or different firms, lead to what we call cartels. That's what we mean by a cartel. Now in the US, cartels are illegal. You can't form cartels. In other words, companies cannot band together and fix the price of the good that they sell or the quantity that they want to sell. You just can't do it. There are antitrust laws that will prevent companies from colluding or from becoming a monopoly. The Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries is one good example of a cartel. For short, we call it OPEC. And OPEC, of course, consists of oil-producing countries, mainly from the MENA region, Middle East, and North Africa. So most of the members of OPEC are Arabic countries, basically. You have probably a few that are not Arab countries, but still the majority are Arab countries in the OPEC. And this OPEC was formed in the was created back in the 1960s, early 60s. But during the 60s, OPEC pretty much operated in obscurity. In other words, not much was known about OPEC, or nobody was actually speaking about OPEC. Now, OPEC became prominent in the 70s. Why? For the simple reason, because as a result of the 1973 Arab-Israeli War, the Arab countries decided to impose an oil embargo on the US and Western Europe. And the reason is simply because the US and Western Europe took sides with Israel in their war against Egypt and Syria. So obviously, the Arab countries wanted the US and Western Europe to pay a price for allying themselves with Israel, which is considered to be an enemy of the Arab world. And as a result, the price of oil in 1973 shot up by about 300%. In other words, it increased actually from $2 a barrel to probably around, or $3 a barrel, to about $12 a barrel, which is close to about 300%. Now, to make things worse for oil consumers, in 1978, we had a revolution take place in Iran that deposed the Shah of Iran. And as a result, the price of oil now jumped again by about 200% or more to about maybe $32 a barrel, I believe, or $36 per barrel. So it jumped all the way from $12 to $36 per barrel. And this is quite significant in that period. And the reason is simply because a lot of the less developed countries were consuming oil because they were in the process of developing their economies. And so they really required to demand a lot of oil. And also the developed industrialized nations were also in need of oil. So their demand for oil was pretty significant. Now this obviously led the oil prices to keep on increasing, simply because, again, the demand and supply of oil is highly inelastic. So any small change in the quantity demanded or supplied for oil will lead to a huge change in price. Now, as a result, of course, from that experience, OPEC learned that, hey, there's something that we just learned from all of this embargo, that we can actually restrict output, and we can continue to restrict output and competition. which would result in high oil prices. In fact, the price of oil jumped all the way up to $140 a barrel before it went down, of course. Right now, it went down to $30 a barrel recently, not far off. In other words, probably in 2009, 2010, it reached about 140, and then in 2014, 2015, the price of oil started to decline simply because of a decrease in demand for oil, because of world recessions, etc. That nowadays the price of oil is close to about $40 a barrel, which is extremely low compared to the maximum price that it saw of $140 a barrel. So you can see there is huge price volatility in oil, and this does not serve the OPEC members either. Even though OPEC may feel that, hey, you know, they're getting economic profits from all of this, but you know, there are times when the price of oil would fall so low that it will pretty much affect the economic plans of OPEC, and it has affected economic plans of OPEC. So this is one of the problems. This is one of the challenges of having to sell a product that is considered to be a primary product which has an inelastic demand and inelastic supply. Now, cartels obviously maximize profits when they behave like profit-maximizing monopolists, and they can only do that by restricting output, which will lead to a high price. Now, there are problems with cartels, of course. In other words, there are many challenges. One of the problems and the challenges is the incentive to cheat, and I will explain this in just a few minutes. Also, another problem is that it's very, very difficult when you have a large number of sellers that are part of a cartel to actually have any control over them. So the more the sellers, the more difficult it is to control these sellers. Another challenge is that the cost and demand structure of the different sellers are very different from one another. And so it's very, very costly and very, very difficult to actually determine what the quota for each country ought to be. And then you have potential competition. When these countries or these companies in a cartel who happen to be making economic profits, this would obviously lead to more countries or more firms entering the market as potential competitors. Why? Because there is a lot of money to be made. Another challenge is if the world faces an economic downturn, maybe a world recession or depression, this will cause oil prices to fall drastically. And then, of course, the presence of substitute goods. Because these countries are making a huge profits, this will attract other firms to produce goods that are substitute to oil. And this obviously causes a problem for the OPEC cartel. Now let's look at this graph here, and this really summarizes everything that we need to know about a cartel. You can see that under competitive situations, the market demand curve and the market supply curve will determine the price and quantity. Prices will be determined at $20. Quantities will be determined at 1,500 barrels per day. Now, let's say the market consists of 10 countries producing oil, or OPEC consists of 10 countries. Obviously, it has more than 10, but for simplicity, let's say that there are only 10 countries producing oil. And let's also assume that initially each country is behaving competitively. In other words, each country is acting individually. They are not in a cartel. So each country has its average cost curve, marginal cost, and when the market price happens to be $20 a barrel, the total quantity produced is 1,500. But we said that there are 10 countries producing oil, so this 1,500 will be divided among the 10, which means that each country will be producing 150 barrels a day at a price of $20 and at an average cost of $20. So what will be the profit that will be made by each country here? Anyone?
Would it be 3,000?
Mm-mm.
No, just kidding.
Be zero economic profit. Each country will only be making normal profit. Why? Because price is exactly equal to average total cost. And when price is equal to average total cost, each country will be making normal profit. Economic profits are zero.
Wait, I'm sorry, could you repeat that explanation again?
Yes. When price is equal to average total cost, each country will be making normal profit. In other words, zero economic profit. And we can say here that the market is in both short-run and long-run equilibrium. When all countries are making normal profits, it's in both short-run and long-run equilibrium. In other words, there is no incentive for any firm to enter or country to enter, or there is no incentive for any country to leave oil production. When everyone is making normal profit, there is no incentive for entrance or exit. Now, let's say all these countries say, you know what? We can do a lot better by simply forming a cartel. So let's form a cartel. In other words, a monopoly. Let's, all of us, these 10 countries, act as one, a monopolist. Now, once that happens, then we have to come to the market demand, and from there, the demand stays the same as before. Nothing changes as far as the market demand is concerned. But what will change now is the marginal revenue. Because remember, under perfect competition, price is equal to marginal revenue. Under monopoly, price is always greater than marginal revenue. So under a monopoly, we have to draw the marginal revenue as a downward sloping line, which must lie below the demand or the price line. And the reason for that is simply because if the monopolist decides to produce and sell more oil, they can only sell it at a lower price. Whereas under perfect competition, if you remember, a firm can sell as much as it wants at the existing market price. They don't have to lower the price in order to sell more. Under monopoly, because the monopoly is the market, then a monopolist, in order to sell more, will have to reduce the price. And that's the reason why the marginal revenue curve is downward sloping. So now the cartel will ask itself and say, okay, we want to maximize profits. So how can we maximize it? Well, the answer to that would be that the cartel must produce a quantity that is commensurate with setting marginal cost equal to marginal revenue. So this is the marginal revenue for the cartel. This is the marginal cost for the cartel. So the point where they meet is the point where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. So all what I need to do is I need to draw a line down to the x-axis to determine what quantity would that correspond to. And as you can see from here, it corresponds to 1,000 barrels a day. So in order for the cartel to maximize its profit, they should not produce 1,500, but they should produce 1,000. And what would be the price for 1,000? How much would the cartel charge?
$30.
How much?
30.
30, very good, $30. Because that's how much consumers are willing to pay for 1,000 barrels, $30. Okay, now we go to each country and find out what would happen. Now each country now will be facing a market price of $30. But in order for that price to prevail, the market should only produce 1,000 barrels. And we know we have 10 countries. So how much should each country produce?
100.
100. So we come right here and we draw a line that will represent the quota for each country. Each country must produce up to 100, not more. So I'm going to draw this vertical line to tell me that no country should exceed this point right here. They should produce only 100. Now, if each country produces 100 barrels, how much profit will each country make?
Is it 0?
What's that?
Is it 0? No profit?
No. They will make huge economic profits. And the economic profits that they will make will be...
Are you talking about a single country or talking about cartel?
Single country, each country. How much, once they form a cartel, how much will each country make? They will make $800 per day, which is equivalent to area A. this would be the profit that each country would make, which is the difference basically between the price and the average cost, because it will cost them $22 to produce each barrel, and they will be able to sell it for $30 a barrel. So the difference there is $8 per barrel. They're selling 100 barrels. So the total profit would be 100 times 8, which is equal to $800. Everyone got that? That's area A. Okay. Since there are no questions, we can move on. Now, what happens if one country says, if I can cheat, and if no one knows what I'm doing, and I've tried to produce a little bit more, I can actually increase my profits quite a lot. In other words, I will not only make area A in profits, but I will also add area B. Now, how will that work? Well, the country will say, okay, the market price is $30. In order for me to maximize profits, I need to set price equal to marginal cost. So this country would obviously take this $30 all the way to its marginal cost curve. And from there, it will be able to determine exactly how much it would want to produce in order to maximize its profits. So that country will produce 180 gallons, 180 barrels, which means 80 more barrels. Now, the price that it will charge for those 80 barrels would be $30, and the cost will be determined by its average cost curve, which is right here for producing 180 barrels, which is equivalent to 22. So 30 minus 22 is 8. 8 times 80, it's 640. So this area B is equivalent to $640. So they're making 800 here plus 640 there. Now, if one country does it, it's pretty safe to say that one country's supply will be insignificant as it relates to the total supply by all the 10 countries. But what happens if more than one country try to cheat? Well, if that happens, this would simply affect the price of oil. Why? Because if everyone decides to increase their production by 80, that simply means that the total amount of oil that will be available in the market will be 1,800, because you have 180 produced by each country. 180 times 10 will be 1,800. Now, if you have 1,800 barrels in the market and the price is $30, this is not going to be sustainable, because at this price of $30, the supply is 1,800, but the demand is only 1,000. So there is excess supply, and this cannot be sustainable. So you will see that the excess supply of oil will result in prices falling, and they will keep on falling until we get to this point right here. In other words, back to square one, where prices would fall to $20 per barrel and quantities produced would go to 1,500 barrels. So in this case, if everyone cheats in a cartel, this will lead to the disintegration of the cartel itself. And what we will have is a perfectly competitive market instead of a monopoly. And that's the reason why it's very important for a cartel to keep a close eye on its members, to discipline its members, and to make sure that all of them abide by the rules set by the cartel. So if the cartel tells you to sell 100 barrels, you better stick to that. Because if you don't and you try to cheat, then this will cause everyone else to cheat. And as a result, the whole cartel will disintegrate. Now, of course, what do you see happening today with the OPEC? Well, in other words, you know, to be honest, I was pretty surprised to see that the cartel, the OPEC cartel, is still in existence. Because I thought that the cartel, you know, would disintegrate and will destroy itself long time ago, for the simple reason because a lot of these countries are pretty much not in agreement with one another. You have countries like Iran and Saudi Arabia. They are members of OPEC, but they don't like each other. You have countries like Qatar and the United Arab Emirates. They are also members of OPEC, but they hate each other. You had countries like Libya under Gaddafi and Saudi Arabia. They hate each other. So, and the list goes on and on. So, you know, there is really no coordination. There is no consistency of policy making, etc. And that was the main reason why I thought that that OPEC will really not survive for long. But to my surprise, they have in fact been able to survive up until now. And I don't know, I'm really not going to predict anymore on what's going to happen. But ultimately, I mean, you know, things are moving, or, you know, the indicators are telling us that oil in 20 years' time is not going to be the same thing as it is today, for the simple reason because the demand for oil in 20 years is not going to be as high as it is today, simply because of new technologies, new transportation, new substitutes to oil. You know, there's so many things working against it, basically. So, you know, I'm just going to give it probably another 10, 20 years. I don't know if I'm going to be alive to see it, but still, this is, you know, what you see is going to happen to the oil-producing countries and cartel, that there will come a point where it will disintegrate. And there will be no more OPEC. But, you know, having said that, OPEC countries must decide to, first of all, find ways to diversify their economies and to depend less on oil, and use these opportunities of high oil revenues to actually use them towards diversification plans and do something else instead of simply relying on oil. Because as I said, this will not last for a long time. And unfortunately, the MENA region is not taking any, well, some of them are taking steps, but those steps are highly futile right now. They're really not amounting to much. And who knows? We will just have to wait and see to see what direction the MENA region or the oil producing or OPEC, what direction they're moving. And we will be able to tell. So, you know, I really don't want to say anything anymore about OPEC. World Bank, you know, there are not going to be any questions on this on the exam, but yeah, this is for general knowledge. It's good to actually see uh, what the World Bank is and what the function of the World Bank is. Well, the World Bank is not, of course, defined in the same way a traditional bank is defined. In other words, you can't go and deposit money in the World Bank and have a checking account with the World Bank. This is not what the World Bank does. What the World Bank does is that it simply helps less developed countries to formulate development plans. It gives loans to less developed countries for development projects. It does give a lot of recommendations, a lot of advice to less developed countries in building institutions. It does lend a lot of its engineers to less developed countries to build highways, dams, etc. So, you know, I mean, the World Bank does a lot of work. However, you know, its role right now, it's diminishing with now, for example, you have a lot of other institutions jumping in to help less developed countries with loans. You have the BRICS, for example, you know, Brazil, Russia, India, China. Those are the BRIC countries. They have obviously formulated their own World Bank, if you will, which is, you know, works in competition with the World Bank itself in trying to provide help for poor countries, less developed countries, by giving them loans, by helping them develop certain projects, economic projects, etc. So, you know, the World Bank is seeing some competition from the BRICS, basically. And the BRICS seems to be doing a good job in taking a lot of the functions away from the World Bank. Now, this simply shows you exactly how the World Bank lends its money. In other words, the money that it lends, where does it go to? Well, 7% goes to agriculture, 8% to education, 16% to energy and mining, 22% for public administration, law and justice, 17% towards transportation, 12% towards water, sanitation, and flood protection. So, I mean, you can see that the World Bank is heavily involved in a lot of these developmental projects for the less developed countries. So, you know, it has done a good job, basically. The International Monetary Fund, again, acts as a bank for the central banks of member nations. And its main function, basically, is to give out loans for countries, and these countries don't need to be developing countries like the World Bank. In other words, the World Bank will only help developing countries. It will not help rich, developed, industrialized countries, only developing. However, the IMF helps both rich, poor countries when it comes to getting rid of their trade deficits. That's what the IMF is there for, to help countries eradicate the trade deficits that they may have, help countries with foreign exchange. If they need foreign exchange to make payments for their imports, that's what the IMF does. Now, there are two strategies that less developed countries happen to use in order to develop their economies. One strategy is known as import substitution. This is an inward oriented strategy. In other words, what import substitution means is that countries tend to produce the goods that they usually import from overseas to produce them at home. In other words, they will develop the necessary manufacturing in order to produce those goods at home instead of importing them. That's why this strategy is known as import substitution. And this is an inward-oriented strategy. Or they can use export-led growth. The export-led growth, of course, simply means that these countries will focus on manufacturing goods that are labor-intensive in nature, because a lot of these countries happen to have a competitive advantage in producing labor-intensive goods. So these countries will focus on producing labor-intensive manufactured goods and export these goods overseas. So this is known as export-led growth strategy. Now, both of them, of course, have benefits and costs, of course. But, you know, a lot of economists did a lot of work, and they showed that the export-led strategy happens to benefit less developed countries a lot more than the import substitution strategy. Now, is economic growth good for the poor? Yes. Some economists may say, no, it depends. But overall, yes, economic growth is good for the poor. Now, the reason why some economists might argue against that is because they would tell you that growth has a cost, like anything else. In other words, there is no such thing as a free lunch. So economic growth also has a cost, and this cost happens to affect the poor a lot more than it affects anyone else. And for that reason, they say, well, you know, economic growth may actually not work for the poor. Now, this is obviously short-sightedness. Economic growth does, in fact, alleviate the poor living standards of the poor. And it does give them a better chance in life. That's why you need economic growth. But again, you know, the argument goes that there's a cost, and usually the poor happens to pay most of that cost in terms of less consumption. That's the economic cost of growth, reduced present consumption. And also, growth may lead to environmental problems that the poor, again, will obviously be affected tremendously. Poor quality of air, water, etc. All of that will be affected, and as a result, the poor will be affected more than the rich, because the rich, obviously, they do have resources, they have money to actually import these things from overseas, or they have the power or the money to actually get a better water quality, etc. Whereas the poor, you know, they don't have those opportunities. So, you know, according to this argument, the poor will suffer the most. And also it says that multinational corporations will come to poor countries as the country opens up for economic growth. And these multinational corporations will exploit workers, will create sweatshops, will give subsistence wages, etc., etc. So, you know, I mean, the argument goes on and on. But on the whole, economic growth is good also for the poor. So this is basically the conclusion that I want to come up with. Can all developing nations achieve export-led growth? Well, it depends. Certain nations have done extremely well with this strategy. Other nations have not done as well. So it really depends on the economic structure of the country. It depends on the planning capabilities of each country. It depends on how the country's domestic resources are being allocated, etc., etc. So there are a lot of things that the success of these strategies would be. It all depends on what each country is doing, basically, and you can't simply put all the less developed countries under one label. They're pretty much diversified in everything, in population, in resources, in structure, in planning, in government, highly diversified. So it's very, very difficult to come up with one sweeping conclusion and say, yes, it will benefit all. No, not really. Again, economic success would depend on this highly diverse availability of natural resources, populations, cultures, economic policies. In other words, what I just talked about, basically. And it also depends on the high rates of investment. How much investment is each country willing to do? The high and increasing endowments of human capital due to universal primary and secondary education. So again, human capital plays an important role. And you see that China and the Southeast Asian countries were successful partly because they were able to foster competitiveness, invest in people, provide favorable competitive climate for the private enterprise. Their economies were very open to international trade. They actively sought foreign technology, and they encouraged free and competitive labor markets by simply discouraging trade unions, minimum wage legislation. All of that helps to make labor markets competitive, free, and highly mobile. And you can see from there what these countries have done in terms of economic growth. You can see, for example, China at 7.7% growth throughout. Cambodia very, very close. The Philippines remarkable as well. The only country, I guess, that did not do as well is Thailand. In other words, they started very well at 6.5, but then you can see that they have floundered over time. In 2014, their annual growth rate is only about a half percentage point, which is not acceptable for Thailand. So, but the rest of the countries, as you can see, they're pretty much stable in terms of annual growth rates and very high, remarkably high. And I guess, I'm going to leave it there. I would really love to talk about China because China is an interesting economy. And China, in fact, has been extremely successful. And there are reasons why China was successful. However, we really don't have the time to go through all of that. In fact, this could be relegated to a course in economic development. So those of you who are interested, I recommend you to actually take a course in economic development, whereby you will have an opportunity to talk at length, with all these problems and challenges of less developed countries. But you know what? I'm going to promise you one thing here, and that is if we can finish all the chapters before the allotted time, I am going to pretty much get a chance to talk to you about the Chinese economy in one session. We will leave this till the end. In other words, first we need to finish what we have to finish according to our syllabus. Once we do that, if we have time left, I would like to allocate that time to simply look at China's economy, because it's a very, very interesting economy to analyze and to see where they went wrong and what did they do right, and how come other countries are not replicating the Chinese model, etc., etc. And I would very much like to get some students I know who are of Chinese heritage to actually get involved here, because they know more about China than I do, and as a result they will help us in as far as understanding and analyzing the Chinese economy a lot better with their inputs, hopefully. So, you know, there is a plethora of information to add by those students who happen to be of Chinese descent, or who happen to be actually Chinese nationals and they're foreign students taking economics here in the US. So, you know, those inputs would be highly appreciated, and hopefully we can do that at the end of the semester. Okay, we are running out of time, so are there any questions? Okay.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, I was trying to access the recordings, and they said they don't exist anymore or something like that.
Yeah, you have to go to YouTube. Just put my name.
Oh, it's on YouTube.
Yeah, it's on YouTube. Just put my name, Nasser, Nasser, Douala, and you will get all the lectures recorded on YouTube.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. Any other question? So please let other students know that the lectures are on YouTube. I have done that several times on Titanium, but it seems like, you know, some students probably are not reading my announcements. But anyway, just share this information with other students that you know, that, hey, all my lectures are on YouTube. So they have access to that simply by just putting my name, typing my name on YouTube. You will get all my lectures. And just focus on international economics. Don't look at the political economy of MENA, because I have lectures regarding the political economy of MENA as well. So you don't need to do that. Just focus on international economics. Okay?
Thank you, Professor.
You're welcome. Okay, then all of you have a wonderful weekend, and hopefully I will Zoom with you on Tuesday, and if anyone has any questions, please let me know then. Okay?
Thank you, Professor. Are you home yet?
Yeah, I'm home. Yeah, I
me too. We were evacuated too.
Yeah, actually, I came back yesterday. So,
we came back today. We were evacuated as well.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I just came in by myself. Nobody told me to come. I just felt that, hey, you know, there's nothing better than home, sweet home. So
yeah, but we couldn't, because the evacuation didn't been lifted up until 5 p.m. yesterday, and we already paid for the hotel. So my husband and I say, well, we just stay until tomorrow morning.
Oh, okay, that's good. Well, at least you're back and you're safe, and hopefully nothing happened to your house, right? Everything is
they are fine, because the fire is so close to my house. The Chino Hills National Park have a fire too.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you know, I was surprised. I mean, when I looked at the intensity of the fire, I said, hey, this is it. This is really going to take the whole thing down. But fortunately, you know, everyone is okay, and you know, the houses are still intact, and the neighborhoods are fine. And as I said, it's a miracle, basically. When you look at the intensity of the fire a couple of days ago, you will know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, yeah.
But,
Do you see the airplane spray those pink chemical to
right,
stop the fire?
exactly, yeah. And the firefighters did an excellent job too. I mean,
Yeah, yeah. They
they
always.
worked tirelessly, basically. No sleep, 24 hours. I mean, my goodness. I mean, we really owe them
Yeah. Oh,
huge
okay.
gratitude. Yeah.
You
Okay.
have a nice weekend.
All right. Thank you very much. Take care, everyone.
You
And
too.
again, as I said, I will see you next time.
So, are you going to revise the homework due date on the titanium?
No, don't worry. Even if I don't, you're fine. I mean, you can submit it, 10, 12 days from now. That's okay.
Yeah, because
accept
we
it.
don't have enough information for him.
No, but in about a week, you should be able to have enough information to answer those questions. Don't worry.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.